What's up, gamers? It's WeDS Rebel here. We're going for platinum on Trackmania. We already got 200 career author times. Now we're going for 90 track of the day author times. I have about 15 so far. I like starting way at the beginning because that's real easy. The earliest track of the days, people are still figuring out the map editor. People start figuring out the physics, how to drive. And I've got a pretty good record for author times here in this first month here. This one I can't load, which gives it that air of mystery. Every time I try to load it, either on or off stream, it crashes my game, so I have never gotten past the loading screen. So we just kind of leave that one. This one takes like a minute and a half, and it's obnoxious, so we leave that one. I don't know about this one. I might try this one. There was I didn't want to do. There's an ice one. I don't like doing. We're gonna listen here to the Four Horsemen talk. I just need like a, to recharge my batteries with some reason. So unfortunately, one of these people is kind of canceled, and one of them's dead. No, I think two of them are dead. Unfortunately. Okay, so only Sam Harris remains. But here's the Four Horsemen. Let's hear what they have to say.
Shrill. What do we think about that?
Yeah, well, I'm amused by it because I went out of my way in my book to address reasonable religious people, and I flew the draft with groups of students who were deeply religious. And indeed, the first draft incurred some real anguish. And so I made adjustments. And it didn't do any good in the end because I still got hammered for being rude and aggressive. And I came to realize that it's a normal situation. It's a mug's game. The religions have tried to make it impossible to disagree with them critically without being they sort of play the hurt feelings card at every opportunity, and you're faced with the choice of, well, am I going to be rude, or am I going to articulate this criticism? I mean, am I going to articulate it, or am I just going to button my lip? And
right. Well, that's what it is to trespass a taboo. I think we're all encountering the fact that religion is held off the table of rational criticism in some kind of formal way, even by, we're discovering, our fellow secularists and our fellow atheists. People to their own superstition.
Just let us believe, believe what you want to believe. That's wrong. It's abject. It's most of the time.
Now that was the point of the title of my book. To resist well, and we got to break it.
In charge of defensiveness, we have a ways to go out. I think this is that without self-pity, we should say that we too can be offended and insulted. I mean, I'm not just in disagreement with someone like Terry Brown down. Accept it now. I tell you, lots of universities disclosed. It says the most he'll demand when it comes to the stoning of women is a moratorium. I find that profoundly much more than annoying.
Right. Yeah.
Insulting, not any insulting.
But you're not offended. This is you don't take any. I see you taking things personally. You're alarmed by the liabilities of certain ways of thinking, as in Robinson's case.
But he would say, right, if I doubt the historicity of the Prophet Muhammad, I've injured them in their deepest feelings.
Right.
Well, I am, in fact, I think all people ought to be offended, at least in their deepest integrity, by, say, the religious proposition that without a supernatural celestial protection, we wouldn't know right from wrong. But we only live by...
Are you really offended by that? Doesn't it just seem wrong?
No, I say only, Sam, that if the offensiveness charge is to be allowed in general and arbitrated by the media, then I think we're entitled to offend that much without being self-pitying or representing ourselves as an oppressed minority, which I think is an opposite danger. I'd like to say that I agree with Daniel that there's no way in which charge against us can be completely avoided, because what we say does offend the core, the very core of any serious politics. deny the utility of these instruments, but maybe it will be terrifically shocked and possibly hurt. It's just too bad.
I'm fascinated by the contrast between the amount of offence taken by religion and the amount of offence that people take against really anything else, like your artistic taste, your taste in music, your taste in art, your politics. You can be not exactly as rude as you like, but you far, far more about such things. And I'd quite like to try to quantify that, to actually research about it, actually test people with statements about their favourite football team or their favourite piece of music or something, and see how far you can go before they take offence, compared to, is there anything else, apart from, say, how ugly your face is, that gives such...
Or your husband's or wife's or
yes.
Well, it's interesting you say that, right? I regularly debate with the terrible Matthew John Donahue of the Catholic Defence. He actually is righteously upset by certain trends in modern art, which tend to draw attention to themselves by blasphemy. For example, Serrano's misplaced or the elephant down. So, and indeed, I think it's quite important that we share with Socrates and other Greek monotheists a revulsion to desecration or to brutality. You don't want to see churches decimated. Indeed, non-religious icons back. So we share an admiration for at least some of the aesthetic achievements.
I think this whole notion of, I think our criticism is actually more barbed than that, in the sense that we are offending people, but we're also telling them that they're wrong to be offended. I mean, physicists aren't offended when their view of physics is disproved or challenged. I mean, that's just not the way rational minds operate when they're really trying to get at what's true in the world. And religion purports to be representing reality, and yet there's this peevish and tribal and ultimately dangerous reflexive response to having these ideas challenged. I think we're pointing to the total liability of that.
Well, and two, there's no polite way to say to somebody,
You've wasted your life.
do you realize you've wasted your life? Do you realize that you've just devoted all your efforts and all your goods to the glorification of something which is just a myth? Or have you ever considered, even if you say, have you even considered the possibility that maybe you've wasted your life on this? There's no inoffensive way of saying it, but we do have to say it because they should jolly well consider it. Same as we do about our own lives.
Dan Barker's making a collection of clergymen who've lost their faith, but don't dare say so because it's their only living. It's the only thing they know what to do.
I've heard from one of them at least.
Have you? Yes.
I used to have this when I was younger in arguments with them on this, but they sort of knew that it was all up. So many of them had suffered a lot, sacrificed a great deal, and struggled manfully to keep what they thought was the great ideal of life. They remained sprinkled, but they couldn't regardless of God or something. But certainly, if anyone said to me, how did you say that to them? I said, you didn't know, you didn't really make it part of it. I said, don't believe it. Don't believe so. It's, I find it, in many cases, almost exactly analogous.
When people tell me I'm being rude and vicious and terribly aggressive, so if I were saying these things about the pharmaceutical industry or the oil interests, would it be rude? Would it be off limits? No, of course it wouldn't. Well, I want religion to be treated just the way we treat the pharmaceuticals and the oil industry. I'm not against pharmaceutical companies. I'm against some of the things they do, but I just want to put religions on the same page.
Including denying tax exemption.
Yeah. Yes.
And, or in the English case, state subsidy.
I'm curious how religion acquired this charm status that it has compared to these other things. It's somehow we've all bought into it, whether we're religious or not. And there's some historical processes related to this immunization of religion against, well, this hyper of faith taking that religion is allowed to take.
And what's particularly amusing to me, finally, at first it infuriated me, but now I'm amused, is they've managed to enlist legions of non-religious people who take offense on their behalf. In fact, the most vicious reviews of my book have been by people who are not themselves religious, but they're terribly afraid of hurting the feelings of people that are religious, and they chastise me worse than anybody.
Exactly my experience.
Religious.
Exactly my experience.
And I think so. One of you pointed out how condescending that view is. It's as though it's like the idea of penitentiary. I mean, other people need them. They
That's right.
must these people safely in their midst. Well, I think there's one answer to that question, which may illuminate a difference that I have with maybe all three of you. There's something about, I still use words like spiritual and mystical without furrowing my brow too much, and it's a consternation of many atheists. I think there is a range of experience that is rare and that is only talked about without obvious qualms in religious discourse, and because it's only talked about in religious discourse, it is just riddled with superstition, and it's used to cash out various metaphysical schemes which it can't reasonably do. But clearly people have extraordinary experiences, whether they have them on LSD, or they have them because they were alone in a cave for a year, or they have them because they just happen to have the neurology that is particularly labile that allows for it. But people have self-transcending experiences, and people have the best day of their life where everything seems, they seem at one with nature. And for that, because religion seems to be the only game in town talking about those experiences and dignifying them, that's one reason why I think that it seems to be taboo to criticize it. You're talking about the most important moments in people's lives, and tragic, at least from their view.
Well, I don't have to agree with you, Sam, in order to say that it's a very good thing you're saying, because it shows that, as you say, religion is not the only game in town when it comes to being spiritual. It's like it's a good idea to have somebody from the political right who is an atheist, because otherwise there's a confusion of values, which doesn't help us. It's much better to have this diversity in other areas, and I think I sort of do agree. But even if I didn't, I think it was valuable to have that.
Right. If one could make one change, and only mine would be to distinguish the humanist from the second.
Yes.
You have one marvelous quotation from Francis Collins, running, so while mountaineering one day, this is overcome by the landscape, and then went down on his knees, accepting Jesus Christ, but he did not say it suggested Jesus Christ created that landscape.
A frozen waterfall in
three parts.
Well, yeah, absolutely. But we're all triune in one way or another. We're programmed for that. That's very clear. There wouldn't ever have been a four.
Right.
I know that from experience. But that would be an enormous distinction to make, and I think it would clear up a lot of this confusion. What we have in our emotions are the surface value of our personalities. That's aren't particularly useful for our evolution. Do belong to us in the second. Don't belong to the supernatural and are not to be descriptive or annexed by atheists.
Yes, it's a sad fact that people, in a sense, won't trust their own valuing of their numinous experiences. They think it isn't really as good as it seems unless it's from God, unless it's some kind of a proof of religion. No, it's just as wonderful as it seems. It's just as important. It is the best moment in your life. And it's the moment when you forget yourself and become better than you ever thought you could be in some way. And see in all humbleness the wonderfulness of nature. That's it. And that's wonderful. But it doesn't add anything to say, golly, that has to have been given to me by somebody even more wonderful.
It's way, Jack, doesn't it?
It's also I think it's a deformity or shortcoming in the human personality, in fact, because religion keeps stressing how humble it is, how meek it is, how accepting. The question becomes about navigation. Actually, it makes extraordinarily arrogant claims. It says that I suddenly realized that the universe is all about me.
Yeah.
And I felt terribly humble about it. Come on, we can laugh people out of that.
Right. Also,
Yeah, and I think we should. I am so tired of if only Professor Dennett had the humility, the blah blah blah,
Yes.
humility, and this from people of breathtaking arrogance. I think I
shove one aside and say, this is just to remind me I'm on Aaron's God.
yeah, right.
What?
This is the
How
point.
honest is that?
This is the point I think we should return to this notion of the arrogance of science.
Oh,
Because
yeah.
there's no discourse which enforces humility more rigorously. I mean, scientists, in my experience, are the first people to say they don't know. I mean, you get a scientist to start talking off his area of
Let's
specialty.
go.
He or she immediately starts hedging his bet, saying, I'm not sure, but I'm sure there's someone in the room who knows more about this than me, and of course, so all the data's not in. This is the mode of discourse in which we are most candid about the scope of our ignorance.
Well, actually, a lot of academics come up with that kind of false modesty. But I do know.
Well, yes, it is.
Many's the story who says, no, I yield to someone.
No, but any academic should do that.
Yes, they should.
The thing about religious people is that they recite the Nicene Creed every week, which says precisely what they believe. There are three gods, not one. Virgin Mary, Jesus died, but down precisely to the and yet they have the call to prove our supreme prophet,
And I don't think many of them ever let themselves contemplate the question which I think scientists ask themselves all the time. What if I mean, it's just not part of their record.
Richard, my friends, makes people hard to read, not precisely what they say. Is needed breath. Belief helped out my unbelief. Graham Greene says the great thing about being a Catholic was that it was a challenge to his unbelief. A lot of people live by keeping two sets of books. In fact, it's my impression. My impression that the majority of the people I know who call themselves believers or people of faith do that all the time. I wouldn't say it was schizophrenia. That would be rude. But they're quite aware of the implausibility of what they say. They don't act on it when they go to the doctor or when they travel or anything of this kind. But in some sense, they couldn't be without it. But they're quite respectful of the idea of doubt. In fact, they try and build it in when they can.
Well, that's interesting then. And so when they are reciting the creed with its total sort of apparent conviction, is this kind of mantra which is forcing themselves to overcome doubt by saying, "Listen, you believe, I do believe, I do believe," because I don't.
And of course, like the secular Catholics, they glare up this affirmation they wouldn't want the people not to be making.
Well, also there's this curious bootstrapping move, which I tried to point out in this recent on faith piece. This idea that you start with the premise that belief without evidence is especially noble. This is the doctrine of faith. It's the parable of doubting Thomas. And so you start with that, and then you add this notion, which has come to me through various debates, that the fact that people can believe without evidence is itself a subtle form of evidence. I mean, we're kind of wired to, actually Francis Collins, you mentioned, brings this up in his book, where the fact that we have this intuition of God is itself some subtle form of evidence. And it's this kind of kindling phenomenon where once you say, it's good to start without evidence, the fact that you can is a subtle form of evidence. And then the demand for any more evidence is itself a kind of corruption of the intellect or a temptation or something to be guarded against. And you get a kind of perpetual motion machine of self-deception where you can get this thing up and running.
But if they liked that, it can't be demonstrated. There'd be nothing to be faithful.
Right. That's right.
If everyone had seen the resurrection and people knew that we'd been saved by it, so then we would be living in an unalterable system of beliefs, and it would have to be policed.
Right. Well,
and it would actually be those who don't believe in it, it's not true because we think it would be horrible. Those who do believe it don't want it to be absolutely proven, so there can't be any doubt about it, because then there's no rest of conscience. There are no dark nights in the soul.
It was a review of one of our books. I don't remember which, but it was exactly that point that just what a crass expectation on the part of atheists that there should be total evidence for this. I mean, there'd be much less magic. If everyone's compelled to believe by too much evidence, Actually, this is Francis Collins. I'm sorry. This is
A
Francis
friend of mine, Canon Fenton, who floats him, said that if the church valued Holy Father Curie, he personally believed. Because if they were doing things like that, he didn't want any part. That's too. I didn't expect myself to absorb. To be as lucky as I was, very full of first week on the road. That was amazing.
Yes, that was amazing.
I just expect Mother Teresa to come out as an atheist. But it's rather interesting. She writes that I can't bring myself to believe any of it. She tells all her confessors, all her superiors.
Oh no, it's long.
It's a very small thing. They write back and say that's good. Right, that's great. There's something gives you a share. That makes you not healthy. You can't be healthy. The less you believe it, the more the spirit more in there. You could be privy. Yes, so that is not like so. So you just have to realize that these really are down there. I just hear it. We can't pray.
That's what you're doing now, and that is, we can say, look at this interesting bag of tricks that we bought. Notice that there are certain influences in them that they don't have any, that they could be about anything. And when you don't argue with them, you simply point out that these are not valid ways of thinking about anything. Because you can have the very same tricks to sustain something which was manifestly fraudulent. And in fact, what fascinates me is that a lot of the freaks, they have their counterparts, but con artists. They use the very same forms of non-argument, the very same non sequiturs, and they make, for instance, they make a virtue out of trust. And as soon as you start exhibiting any suspicion of the con man who's about, he gets all hurt on you and plays the hurt feelings card and reminds you how wonderful taking it on faith is, and how I mean there aren't any new tricks. These tricks have evolved over.
I do want to look at the reduction of purpose special effects as well.
Yeah.
One of the things that really convince religion.
Right.
The belief in the miraculous. The same people will say, well, Einstein felt the spiritual force in the universe when he said the whole point about it is there are no changes in the natural order. That's the miraculous thing. They're completely cynical about painting him.
Well, the other thing
The same almost the same breath.
is that every religious person feels the same criticism of other people's faith that we do as atheists. They reject the pseudo-miracles and the pseudo-claims to certainty of others. And they see the confidence tricks in other people's faith. And they see it rather readily.
Yep.
You know, every Christian knows the Quran can't be the perfect word of the creator of the universe, and anyone who thinks it is hasn't read it closely enough, and it's just in this hermetically sealed discourse that isn't really being self-critical. And I think we're on very strong, we make a very strong case when we point that out, and point out also that whatever people are experiencing,
Science argument. My sister told me when he was in seven.
and by your mere invention in that moment is obviously under convention.
something totally different to a congregation. They'll talk about miracles.
Well, they won't talk to a congregation. And
Archbishops will.
yes, but when the sophisticated theologians try to talk to the preachers won't have any of
Well,
them.
that's
I mean, you got to realize that sophisticated theology is like stamp collecting. It's a very specialized thing, and only a few people do it. And they take in their own laundry, and they get all excited about some very arcane details, and their own religions pay almost no attention to what they're saying. A little bit of it does, of course, filter in, but it always gets beefed up again for general consumption, because what they say in their writings, at least from my experience, is eye-glazing, mind-twisting, very subtle things which have no particular bearing on life.
Oh, no, I must insist. I must say a good word here for Professor Alistair McGrath, who in his attack on Richard said it's not true, as we've always been told, and most Christians believe, that Tertullian said, credo quae absurdum, quae absurdum, I believe it because it's ridiculous. No, it turns out, I've checked this now, though I don't know this from McGrath, that in fact Tertullian said the impossibility of it is the thing that makes it the most believable. That's a worthwhile distinction, I think. And very useful for training one's mind. Very useful for training one's mind in the fine points. It's the likelihood, in other words, that it could have been made up,
Right.
is diminished by the incredibility of it. Who would try and invent something that was
Yeah,
that
they're so
unbelievable?
off the wall.
That actually is,
That's a good
I
point.
think, a debate perfectly well worth having. What I say to these people is this: you're sending your email or your letter to the wrong address. Everyone says, let's not judge religion by its fundamentalists. All right. Take the Church of England. Two of whose senior leaders recently said that the floods in North Yorkshire were the result of homosexual behaviour. Not in North Yorkshire, presume, but probably in London, I think they're thinking. But
God's aim is a little off.
one of these, the Bishop of Carlisle, is apparently about to be the next Archbishop of Canterbury. Now, this is extraordinary. This is supposed to be the mild and reflective and thoughtful and rather, troubled church, making fanatical pronouncements. Well, I want to hear what Alistair McGrath is going to write to the Bishop of Carlisle, not to me. Is he going to say, my Lord Bishop, do you not realize what a complete idiot you're making of yourself and of our church? Did he do this? If he did it in private, I'm not impressed. He has to say it in public.
The Bishop
Why
of
are they
Carlisle
telling me
backtracked.
I will judge the church by statements of its bishops. I think I'm allowed to.
Yeah. But the other thing is that, never mind about the academic theologians, bishops and vicars, who will attack us for taking scriptures, or for accusing people of taking scriptures literally. And of course we don't believe the book of Genesis literally. And yet they do preach about what Adam and Eve did, as though they did exist, as though they're somehow, it's a sort of license to talk about things which they know, and anybody of any sophistication knows, is fiction. And yet they will treat their congregations, their sheep, as though they did exist, as though they were factual. And a huge number of those congregations actually think they did exist.
Can you imagine any one of these preachers saying, as such a topic is introduced, this is a sort of theoretical fiction. It's not true, but it's a very fine metaphor. No, they're just
They kind of, after the fact, imply that that's what they expect you to know.
Yes, but they would never announce it.
There's another point there, is that they never admit how they have come to stop taking it literally. Because you have all these people criticizing us for our crass literalism, whereas fundamentalists is the fundamentalists. And yet these moderates don't admit how they have come to be moderate. What does moderation consist of? It consists of having lost faith in all of these propositions, or half of them, because of just the hammer blows of science and secular politics.
That's literalism.
Yeah, religion has long its mandate on 1,000 questions, and moderates seem to argue that this is somehow a triumph of faith, that faith is somehow
It's not.
There's a cleric in Southern. The first person I see Trackmania being just as fundamentalist as those who are being running
I don't
I hope, sorry, I think he's a very senior actor. Guys, so I would not be seen that most of the launching power trades, etc. But I would say, how can you obligation from? Doesn't that say everything? She was franchise to be the master of the if she was not going through her, she also was quite hard to teach. This was no matter whether that's fallen down in the was not that local rising to was one school, the whole slide. That's next up is new population. The key this is that he does a thing like that. It's a cynical and it's adaptive as the day is long. And we see this we that are as fundamentalist as it's cultural. Thus, I don't really mind. I just have the choice. I have the faculty of and somebody has touched it. I'm not going to replace that. So,
I think that it would be good to make a distinction between the professionals and the amateurs. I share your impatience with the officials of the churches, the people who this is their professional. It seems to me they know better. But the congregation don't know better because it's maintained that they should not know better. I do get very anxious about ridiculing the beliefs of the public because of the way in which they have ceded to their leaders. They've delegated authority to their leaders, and they presume their leaders are. I think in this, who stands up and says the buck stops here? Well, it seems to me it's the preachers themselves, it's the priests, it's the bishops, and we really should hold their feet to the fire. For instance, let's just take the issue of creationism. If somebody in a fundamentalist church thinks that creationism makes sense because their pastor told them, well, I can understand that and excuse that. We all get a lot of what we take to be true from people that we respect and whom we view as authorities. We don't check everything out. But where did the pastor get this idea? And I don't care where he or she is responsible because their job is to know what they're talking about in a way that the congregation
We have to be a little bit careful not to sound condescending when we say that, and in a way it's reflecting the condescension of the preacher.
yes, because I'll take things that you and Richard say on human and natural sciences, not without wanting to check, but often unable to, but knowing that you are the sort of gentleman who would have checked. If you say, the bishop told me it, so I believe it, you make a fool of yourself, it seems to me. One is entitled to say so. Just as one is entitled when dealing with an ordinary racist to say his opinions are revolting. He may know no better, but that's not going to save him from my condemnation. And nor should it. And I think exactly it's condescending, not to confront people as it were one by one or en masse. So public opinion is often wrong. Mob opinion is almost always wrong. Religious opinion is wrong. Religious opinion is wrong by definition. We can't avoid this. I wanted to intrude the name H.L. Mencken on this point. Mm-hmm. Now, a very justly celebrated American writer. Not particularly to my taste, much too much of a Nietzschean, and what really was once meant by social Darwinists. Right. At one stage, why did he win tremendous respect for so many people in this country in the 20s and 30s? Because he said, people who believe what Marxists tell them, what Lenin's pride tells them, are fools. They're not being fooled, they are fools. They should.
Shame on them for believing these.
Yes, they make ignorance was undignified and ignorant, and no medicine was had a greater mixture of wit and evidence and reasoning. It absolutely was the most successful anti-religious polemic there's probably ever been in the 20th century.
I think we just touched upon an issue that we should really highlight, this notion of authority, because religious people often argue that science is just a tissue of uncashed checks. You know, we're all relying on authority. How do you know that the cosmological constant is whatever it is? You know, so I think you two are well placed to do this. Differentiate the kind of faith placing in authority that we practice without fear in science and rationality generally, and the kind of faith